As the age of darkness approached the galaxy, a consuming force spread across the stars, the flames of war. Worlds under its dominion were turned to ash, often leaving no survivors to recount the dead and the committed atrocities. At this time, each of the legions employed unique units adopting unconventional warfare styles, resorting to vile tactics and weaponry by necessity or choice. Many such formations were lost in the grim years following the Horus Heresy. Their traditions were destroyed and their weapon caches depleted. However, information about some of them survived in these records. This is so future generations might learn of the horrors unleashed upon the galaxy by the sons traitors of the Emperor, as well as the valiant heroes who stood against them. Today's episode will discuss the tragic fate of an Imperial world, seemingly unremarkable at first glance. It was discovered by an explorator fleet in the 29th millennium in Segmentum Tempestus. After its exploration and colonization, it was classified as a rich and flourishing agri-world. But it ceased to be so in the 10th year of the 31st millennium when disaster struck. 1,000 ships emerged into reality from nowhere, like driftwood thrown ashore. Disoriented barges rotating on their axes, frantically trying to regain control over their onboard systems and somehow order their fleet. Their armor was damaged, sides and spines studded with guns and launch shafts. Hulls shook, and the nozzles of the engines glowed white-hot. Thus the Iron Wars came to the Segmentum. Last from the warp appeared Iron Blood, carving its path among the scattered fleet. The smaller barges quickly cleared the way for the former Predator, but the ship, the Purity of Fire, was not so fortunate. The bow of the vast battle barge collided with the destroyer, as if struck by a hammer. The smaller ship was torn to pieces, and its reactor turned into a glowing blue sphere. Iron Blood passed through the wreckage, and its armor flashed brightly for an instant upon contact with the fire. It slowed down and came to a stop, its engines dimming like the eyes of a weary man. Gradually, the scattered ships began to gather around it. Signals were sent from one vessel to another. Orders and situational reports flowed in every direction. The fleet regained order, and sensors began to sweep the void. In the star-studded sphere spreading around, one star shone brighter than the others. From such a distance, the unaided eye perceived it as a tiny flaming coin. Planets orbited sparsely, unaware of their fate, peacefully sleeping in the cold void of space. With the lethargy of a waking beast, the fleet turned towards it, and 1,000 ships prepared to extinguish a civilization. The first shot came from the Hammerfall, a nova shell that destroyed the northern orbital defense station above the plains of Kadir and the northern capital city of Ormus. The remainder of the orbital defense network was able to destroy some Iron Warrior ships before they were obliterated. An Imperial fist strike vessel, Light of Inwit, attempted to flee the planet after being unable to warn Marshal Lycus on the surface of the attack, but was destroyed. The same fate befell any surface weapon installations the Iron Warriors discovered. Before launching their invasion, the Iron Warriors bombarded the planet with virus bombs, turning the once verdant world into a barren desert and wiping out the majority of its population. Citizens trying to flee Crescent City were trapped in their transports and killed by the virus attack. 10 million people died in 10 minutes, and the entire surface population was dead within the hour. The only survivors were those humans who managed to hide in underground eco-shelters. Yet when the Iron Warriors launched their attack, the resistance they encountered was fierce and unrelenting. The few survivors emerged and refused to concede the planet. Because of the deadly radiation on the surface, infantry combat was virtually impossible for both sides, and the war on Tallarn was primarily a series of armoured clashes. 7 weeks had passed since the first virus bomb hit the planet's surface, the shelters filled with survivors. After the shock came panic, then a general stupor. There were frequent suicides, demand for prohibited substances of any kind soared to unprecedented levels. Then there were the survivors, 1,000 civilians from the city above, who managed to reach the bunkers before they were sealed. People in dirty clothes from a life that no longer exists were placed in unused vaults. For several days the complex teetered on the brink of madness. Officers clung to protocols like a drowning man to the wreckage of a sinking ship. To enforce discipline, several group executions were carried out, and after them, matters took on some stupefied rhythm. Weeks passed before a semblance of order emerged, and a proposal to venture to the surface was made. Hell ruled above. Therefore, it was decided to conduct reconnaissance in armoured vehicles, following sealing protocols. At that time, the survivors had no idea about the attackers and their presence on the planet. However, they soon got answers to these questions. When movements were noticed in the mustard-green fog, the battle began. Only after a while did the survivors manage to spot an enemy tank with a pointed nose armour and 2 side-mounted weapon hardpoints. The turret was a faceted dome with a silver barrel of a conversion beam projector, and from the frontal armour shone a skull made of black forged steel. Thus, the first predator of the Iron Warriors was identified. Initially, Perturabo could not imagine anyone surviving the attack, as ground forces of the Legion had not observed signs of life for a long time. Communications between the shelters were not intercepted, and the task of searching for survivors simply was not set. The Lord of Iron considered what happened to be an absolute victory, but the first combat encounters made adjustments to his plans. An additional contingent of Iron Warriors landed on the surface. Typhons, Spartans, Predators, and Fellblades left the landing zones, carving bloody tracks through a melange of mud, scrap metal, and human bodies. They were accompanied by Mechanicus machine squads, Legio Cybernetica maniples, and the equipment of the Legion-attached guard regiments. This was an army of annihilation, and there was no doubt they would finish off the survivors. Meanwhile, in the dungeons, preparations for vengeance had concluded, and the remnants of the once mighty 701st Journeyan Armoured Regiment had emerged from their underground shelters to reignite the Battle of Tallarn with newfound ferocity. The Loyalist squads operated in small groups, which included a scout vehicle and either a vanquisher or an executioner. The latter were tasked with finishing off targets. They ambushed enemy predators and Spartans. Thus, they retained the element of surprise. But after the first shot, their main mission became survival, as the scout vehicle was an easy target for a counterstrike. Here, support machinery entered the fray. However, the executioner's energy weapons were too unreliable against targets larger than a medium tank. Its thermal radiation was too strong for it to make the first shot. Thus, the true killer remained the vanquisher tank. Occasionally, ambushes turned into tank duels, where 2 adversaries exchanged high-explosive salvos until one remained. The Loyalists were not afraid to destroy Tallarn, nor did they fear dying in battle, for their hearts were ablaze with the desire for vengeance. The real fear came when fuel ran out or the machine received damage that prevented further movement. While the power-armoured Astartes could exit and repair their machines, the loyal mortal crews had no such option. Therefore, the tankers were left to wait for death by asphyxiation inside their sealed machines. It was a grand war of revenge. Tank squadrons ventured into brief surface raids, killed the Iron Warriors, and vanished back into the underground shelters. Dead bodies dissolved in the poisoned soil, and through the remnants of ruined machinery, a deadly wind roamed. Yet, this was not the true battle. Perturabo had only sent a fraction of the Legion's might to the surface. The bold raiders harvested their bloody crop, but the Iron Warriors constantly replenished their fallen with new fighters. Without reinforcements, the surviving inhabitants would quickly expend their strength, and their struggle would remain but a tiny footnote in someone's diary. This battle simply had to endure through the millennia. But for that, forces loyal to the Emperor were needed, ones that knew a war to win was at hand. A pivotal moment in history was required. The Empire had to be warned, any loyal ship nearby had to be alerted. And this became possible thanks to the old astropath Halakheim. Marshal Lycus found him, and the word of Tallarn's demise was sent into the void. Far beneath the starry vaults, astropaths emerged from their trance, awakened by visions of iron giants in black armour marching through dead cities. With tremors in their limbs, they discerned the meaning of the message received, as a psychic echo of a death scream quivered in their forms. "Come to us, the message said. "The Iron Warriors killed Tallarn. Its grave will be the anvil upon which you break them." The message was heard on the bridge of the Lament of Caliban. In the Conclave of Iron, the Princeps of the Legio Griffonicus and the Myrmidon Lords of Zelth heard it. Amidst the silence of the Neran Gulf, the ships of Niobe the Castigator heard. Alone in the tower of his war bark, Tempest Law General of 70,000 swords heard. And in 100 more quiet places, 1,000 more, the loyal warriors of the Emperor heard. And one by one, they rose to answer the siren call of war. Due to the complete lack of information about the state of the star system, the first ships arrived individually and came under the fire of the Iron Warriors. When fleets gathered at Tallarn, chaos ensued in orbit as the Loyalists arrived without any plan. Lacking unified command, they attempted to land on the surface immediately, unaware that it had been poisoned. The dead pioneers taught something to the rest. After some time, the ships of Admiral Forok hung over the planet's north pole and began dispatching supplies on the Khedive Plains. The transports of Legio Griffonicus landed, but the arrivals were guided by signals from the shelter in the Sapphire City, and dropped hundreds of new war machines to join forces with the survivors. And Perturabo, having become virtually the supreme ruler of Tallarn, directed a new wave of fighters to the surface. Few realized that the Iron Warriors were not the only followers of Horus on Tallarn. Among the survivors were agents of the Alpha Legion. Operative Jalen regularly met with Akil Sulan, commanding most of the Sapphire City. Upon arrival at the shelter under the Sapphire City, Akil met with Jalen and other agents of the Alpha Legion. Akil threatened Jalen, but Jalen said that they had no relation to the Iron Warriors' attack because they planned to take the planet without bloodshed. In the end, both sides struck a deal. The spy was to save Sulan's daughters, and in return he would allow saboteurs to infiltrate the ranks of the Loyalists. In the end, a bloody battle ensued on the surface. Eventually, the Iron Warriors managed to capture, with the covert aid of the Alpha Legion agents, the shelter beneath the Sapphire City and use it as a secure staging ground on the surface. It was of immense size and stretched to the Crescent Ocean. The agents of the Alpha Legion concluded that the war could only be ended with the intervention of the War Master. Meanwhile, to the south, a major battle was raging, which could have been decisive. However, right in the heart of the battle, macro-transporter Eagle's Talon crashed. Its control was seized by reconnaissance squads of the Imperial Fists, and they eventually perished. The surface was engulfed in an explosion that covered over 300 kilometers, spawning terrifying winds that raged for 6 days. Afterward, the sky cleared, and the sunlight began to return gradually. A warsmith named Kapanos of the Iron Warriors managed to survive the blast in his Rhino, but was forced to leave it and seek shelter from the toxic environment. He found an Imperial warlord Titan rebooted its systems and deceived the paralyzed Princeps. After installing a new control system, Kapanos continued to fight. At some point, a lone barge approached the planet. On board was a space marine capable of fundamentally changing the course of this brutal war. Had any Imperial chronicler in his works indicated that it was thanks to him that the renegades retreated from Tallarn, he would have been immediately executed for heresy, because an emissary of the warlord named Argonis was flying towards the planet. He was accompanied by Prophesius the Astropath and Sotanul of the Dark Mechanicum. The guest was granted an audience with the Iron Lord and asked why they had arrived at Tallarn. The irritated Primarch answered that the planet was a highly valuable strategic asset on the path to Terra, after which Argonis was ordered to leave. But he did not believe what he had heard and contacted the Alpha Legion. Operative Jalen assured him he did not know the reasons for the Fourth Legion's presence on Tallarn, but admitted that the Alpha Legion had been on the planet before their arrival. Argonis headed to the shelter, not believing the agent's words. He was unaware that the Imperial Infocyte agent, Ieo of Clade Venus, was watching him and the Alpha Legion, attempting to pit Horus's allies against each other. The third assault by the Loyalists on the shelter failed, as did the previous ones, because orbital bombardments couldn't penetrate the shelter. The Iron Warriors attempted to destroy the crushed Imperial assault force, but the Imperial Grand Cruiser Memlock sacrificed itself to fend off orbital attacks. Soon, the Loyalists faced new failures. 400 combat vehicles were inexplicably lost from Kobalak's shelter. All inhabitants of the Casildian Mountains bunker fell due to atmospheric contamination. However, the recently arrived Legio Krytos was able to land Titans and Knights from House Caesarion onto the southern hemisphere. The battle became protracted. Both sides regularly received supplies and corresponding orders from their headquarters, but neither wished to admit defeat. The Imperial Fists and Iron Hands dispatched forces to the planet, and their predators proved instrumental in combating traitor tanks. Over 1 million units of armoured vehicles clashed in the desert. The Talons quickly realised they could not match the Space Marines in open combat. Therefore, they attacked with a hit-and-run tactic. Suddenly, the Golden Fleet appeared in the system. Led by the Eagle Claw, by rogue trader Sangria on board, who had last been here before the start of the Great Crusade. It was composed of mercenaries and ships acquired through conquest, including the Sacristan Geneo Het warriors, Knights of House Clays, and 300 Ultramarines. Entering the system, the Golden Fleet transmitted a message to the Iron Warriors, declaring themselves allies of the War Master. It was a deceit, and the fleet opened fire on the traitors as soon as it came within range. The ships blocked incoming communication channels for the Loyalists and bombarded the traitor transport ships, attempting to land on the surface. The line cruisers attacked the fuel loaders, and a real fire spread through the upper layers of the atmosphere, which came to be known as the Inferno Tide. Then the Golden Fleet left the system in complete silence. Perturabo sent the Contemptor dreadnought Hrend with the corrupted navigator Hesthal and a strike force to search for the Black Oculus on the surface of the planet. This became the answer to why the Iron Warriors had come to Tallarn. After assessing the damage inflicted on the planet, agents of the Imperium and chroniclers were able to reconstruct a fragment of that terrible war. "Navigator!" Dreadnought growled. The laboured breathing of Hesthal was his answer. "It's here! Are you sure? Do you see it, War Machine?" Hesthal hissed. "And it watches in return." Hrend instinctively wanted to nod. His iron body shuddered in response. He switched to the communication channel with the crew carrying the navigator. "Kill the navigator," he said without waiting for confirmation. A second later, he felt something that was creaking inside his skull disappear. "Begin here, on this soil." The excavator crawled out and began to unfold. Supports dug into the ground. The back of the machine opened and, like wings of an insect corroded by rust, armor plates slid back. The drill head emerged and touched the dry soil. Teeth were already spinning and earth barrels covered the entire length of the drill. Hrend stepped back. Scanning beams touched the dry land, blinked, darted from side to side, and disappeared. Tanks of the squad maneuvered around the huge machine, forming a circle. Teeth accelerated, turning into a blurred spot. Hrend watched the tension in the drive pistons, and the drill head plunged into the ground. The earth erupted like a fountain. The wind caught it and turned it into a swirling cloud. The ground began to tremble. Around it, the fires of battle continued to burn. He looked down. The black sun was there at the edge of his vision, a cold aura of presence on his shoulder. The drilling rig grated as it bit into the skin of Tallarn. He remembered his conversation with Perturabo at the beginning of his mission. "On this world, there is a weapon hidden in its heart or buried under its skin," said Perturabo. "The Aeldari called it Cursus of Alganar. It is an ancient thing, appeared long before Terra gave life to humanity. That is why we came here. That is why we are still here. A weapon capable of defeating angels. I want you to go to the surface of Tallarn. I want you to find it for me." Hrend felt the weighty pause after those words. Then he gave the only possible response. "I will execute it." Perturabo walked away, returning no reply. He had nearly reached the cave's edge when Hrend asked the question that lingered in his mind. "Lord," Perturabo half turned, and his automata and bodyguards halted. "Once we obtain it, what shall we do?" The Primarch stared at Hrend for a moment, though the latter could not tell if he was being assessed or contemplated. "Once we obtain it, we shall do as the universe demands, and we will carry out our duty." He lowered his head, and the light left his features, casting shadowy hollows. We will destroy all who stand in our way. Memories flowed at the edge of Hren's mind, observing the dust carried away by fire. The cutters and alloys on the drill bit cracked, revealing smoke and steam. The drill burrowed deeper, and Hren felt Tallarn tremble. Meanwhile, Argonis had reached the shelter and was negotiating with the commander of the Iron Warriors named Volk. Once before they had served together at Carmeline and the Redus cluster. Their conversation was abruptly cut off without any new information when the ground above the shelter was bombarded. Argonis broke free from the Iron Warriors' guard and headed for the shelter's data arrays, where Sota Nul discovered a mention of the Black Oculus. At the destination, many bound and sleeping navigators were found. Awakening one, Argonis learned what happened in the Eye of Terror. As they left the compartment, the alarm was triggered, and the entire group was captured. Governor Militant Delisarius managed to unify the fragmented forces of the Loyalists into a single fist and coordinate an attack. He believed that one major strike across all fronts could break the Iron Warriors and force their surrender. However, Delisarius was killed right after the hellish tide subsided. The forces of the defenders split again until General Gorn took command and declared that their only strategy for victory was offensive action. Eventually, after a powerful strike across the plains, the Iron Warriors left the shelter and engaged in large-scale battle. Meanwhile, Agent Jalen discovered that Perturabo had arrived on Tallarn in search of the Black Oculus. He intended to use its power to gain an advantage over his brothers, possibly to become like Horus. The agent boarded the Iron Blood and freed Argonis to stop the Lord of Iron. Instead of gratitude, the emissary dispatched the agent, for he held knowledge of the artifact. As soon as Argonis was allowed to approach Perturabo, the latter demanded a cessation of hostilities and ordered the fleet away from Tallarn. Upon refusal, he commanded the removal of shackles from Prophesius the Astropath, and among all those present on Tallarn, perhaps only Aieo surmised the true role of Prophesius, and the info model of this Astropath was a sketch of ephemeral probabilities. She was almost certain that this being was not human or had been significantly altered under psychic influence. In her observations of him, she saw complete subservience. There were other signs, too, indicating an almost total absence of self-determination, save for the ability to follow commands. The mask on his head was clearly not a simple device. She also decided not to remember the intricate details of the runes carved into the mask's metallic surface. Merely glancing at them jumbled her thoughts. Yet, despite the inadequacy of the info model, she managed to deduce the role and significance of Prophesius. He served as a conduit of communication between the emissary and Horus himself. As soon as Argonis removed the mask from Prophesius, his body convulsed and plumes of smoke burst from his mouth, forming a gigantic apparition of the War Master. Lupercal observed all this from afar, watching over the actions of the Lord of Iron on Tallarn. It was hard to say what disappointed him more: the desires of his brother to receive blessings and become Horus's equal, or the fact that he so thoughtlessly threw his soldiers into battle. No, his warriors, the warriors of a true warrior. Lupercal did not present any arguments to justify shooting Perturabo, and did not entertain his brother's excuses. A single phrase echoing ominously through the ship's hall was enough: kneel. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Prend unearthed an artifact that was, in fact, a gate of the gods, yet he resisted the temptations of demons and chose death. The Contemptor dreadnought Hrend activated his self-destruct mechanism, detonating himself with the words, "Iron from within." As for the Imperial Infosite, Yeo, she witnessed the execution of Operative Jalen from within one of the ventilation shafts. However, she realized too late her mistake. A Hydra cannot have just one head. The realization that I am Jalen is not a single person came after an explosion, which ejected her from the shaft. Falling from a great height resulted in fractures. As she fell, she heard the command for a tactical retreat pass through Perturabo's troops, a puzzled buzz through the comm lenses of the Alpha Legion, as the last seconds of life flew into the past. It was a long journey, a lengthy road between the start of the mission and its termination. Before her death, She blocked the Vox channels to ensure no message about the discovery of the black oculus would reach its intended recipient. The Battle of the Khedive ended after 6 days, not with the purity of fire, but with a slowly fading rage. 1,000 tanks retreated like a sea wave, scattered with debris along the shore. Damaged knights and titans silently withdrew from the battlefields. Hours after the battle's end, thousands of crew members trapped in tanks perished due to lack of oxygen. 12 hours later, squads of Iron Warriors began their slow retreat. 3 weeks later, silence finally settled on the planet's surface. A week thereafter, General Gorn and his team entered the corridor of the shelter. 4 weeks later, a signal emerged from the planet, reaching far beyond the star system. The Imperium has triumphed. Tallarn has withstood.